Malolele, bonjour, hello, Nisam Bulavinaka. Welcome to the Pacific Way. To celebrate the Pacific Community, or SPC's 70th anniversary, we have a number of new and exciting stories, as well as a lineup of stories that have featured on the Pacific Way in the past, stories that mattered to Pacific people. When World War II broke out in 1939, no one thought scattered island nations in the Pacific would be affected. In 1943, Pacific Island countries like Kiribati were identified by Allied forces as key posts in the region. With coast watchers arriving on the atoll, the war had arrived at our doorstep. The Battle of Tarawa began as the U.S. Marines fought against the invading Japanese soldiers. 7,000 soldiers from both sides died during the confrontation, and over 700 locals lost their lives. This is the Battle of Tarawa.
Our country is made up of 33 tiny atolls spread over a vast ocean area of the Central Pacific.
We're situated somewhere near where the equator crosses the international date line. Really, you could say that we're in the midmost heart of the ocean.
In many ways, Kiribati is one of the world's best kept secrets. In our communities, the discerning traveler can experience a way of life which has largely been lost in more developed societies. Here, time stands still. But perhaps more importantly, it offers the visitor a chance to catch his or her breath and re-enter life at a more gentle pace. But our history hasn't always been peaceful. Here in 1943, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the Pacific War was fought, the Battle of Tarawa. In 4 days, this small piece of earth cost the lives of some 7,000 US Marines and Japanese defenders. And here, 60 years later, the Marines have landed again. While we await the arrival of the President of Kiribati, let us pause a moment and reflect on the circumstances which have led to this day.
On the 1st of September 1939, World War II began with the German Blitzkrieg attack on Poland. 3 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany.
At the outbreak of World War II, Kiribati was the Gilbert's part of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony. The main concern of the Allies at that time was the presence of German raiders in the Pacific, and a team of New Zealand Post Office employees was sent to these islands as coast watchers and wireless operators. It must have seemed a great adventure for these young men. Some were in fact so young they had to get their parents' permission to go overseas.
All the coast watchers were just young boys, and they were mostly from rural areas, I think, too. So, you know, they didn't know what life was about at all.
Each wireless operator was accompanied by at least one unarmed soldier companion. The soldiers found they had very little to do, but the operators at least had their daily routines of coast watching and reports to transmit. Some of the more enterprising drew on local skills to assist in their work.
They fished, and I think they got on well with the local people. they joined in pretty well. One of them in particular joined in very well.
In most cases, these young men were very reliant on local support for their very survival, and the natural hospitality and curiosity of our people led to many close bonds of friendship.
I think Arthur maybe had a slightly harder time because he was, well, different time because he was younger, so he spent more time with the children.
In at least 3 cases, the close bonds were quite intimate, leading to the births of 3 children to local women. Indeed, the prospect of war must have seemed very remote in this quite exotic location.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. Suddenly, the Gilbert Islands were on the front line. 2 days after Pearl Harbor, Japanese imperial forces landed on the northern islands of Putaritari and Makin. It has been estimated that some 730 Gilbertese men, women and children lost their lives in World War II. Winnie Powell and her sister Connie were children when the Japanese invaded Putaritari.
Sito ngaira o isaina. Ndaya kan awa pakas akia politarin suku. Iyon politarin ndaya kan. Ayaren kan yang kisah sukung kiki ya. Sanura aron kanga nakatiti sadan. Hari ako nandok. Atawa kanga kotoy ko. Atap ikay English. Kanga ane tayan nikati ya kisipon nori natara.
In September 1942, the Americans made a raid on Putaritari from a submarine. Their occupation was short-lived, and 13 Americans were captured and taken north to Kwajalein. But the Japanese suspected local involvement and sent their bombers to punish the small village of Gewea. The Japanese bombing of Gewea resulted in the deaths of 48 men, women and children.
Na ite kanini kan ngi aki na kun nikapakapo mi ono putalitari aya na kun nikasiyari ngayari aboni tali na gatina tintaya kan amane rangkan yari are pinara aya tara.
The increased American activity prompted the Japanese to extend their control to the more southern islands. They were on the lookout for Europeans and coast watchers. As the Japanese presence increased, the coast watchers and the few remaining Europeans knew that their days of freedom were numbered. One by one, the remaining coast watchers heard their colleagues sign off. From Mayana, Arthur Heenan's last message simply said, "Japanese coming, regards to all."
When the Japanese first came to Mayana, Arthur and the other 2 men hid for 2 or 3 days until the Japanese went away. But then they came back about a week later.
On the third occasion, the locals in the village were rounded up, and they took one of the local men and cut his ear off, and said that they were going to do more of the same thing if they didn't, show them where the men were hiding. And then they went off in their boat again, and when they returned, the men were there waiting for them.
During that week, if they'd had a boat of some sort, they could have might have had a chance of escaping.
The 17 New Zealanders were brought to the fortified island of Beso in Tarawa. There they were held with 5 other Europeans, 2 Australians, a wireless operator and a retired sea captain, and 3 British nationals. One of these was the Reverend Sad. The people of Peru say he would have been safe, but his refusal to trample on the Union Jack enraged the Japanese commander, and he was taken away. Local eyewitnesses in Beso say the captives were held in appalling conditions and very badly treated. Then, in an act of singular brutality, the 22 defenseless men were taken out and executed, beheaded.
It's a horrible thought, really, for everyone waiting, for their turn. That's what I think must have been the most terrifying thing, would be, to just wait in line, because I don't think it was 22 men with each with a sword at the same time. I think it was one after the other, which would have been really pretty awful. So it's really sad. I mean, I'd really like to say that they were terribly courageous, and in a way they were, but in a way they didn't have an option. Once you're somewhere, there's nothing much you can do about it, and you just got to do the best, right? And so I think they did the very best.
During the same period, the 13 American prisoners of war in Kwajalein were also executed. Despite these well-documented atrocities, there were also moments where individuals rose above the prevailing barbaric conditions.
Ilang may si boko yeso ni kakana direk pa na akin may boko na nakam na akin nakukumigay siya da nangayara ngayang an sa ate yata nakukumigay siya da.
In life there is nothing all right or all wrong. There is good and bad in all of us. The thing I remember most about the war was the Japanese wireless operator. He told the boys who were cooking for them that the Japanese had decided to kill all the missionaries. And he said he was sorry for the sisters. The boys came and told us, and late that night, a Japanese officer visited Father Grand George and asked him whose side he was on. Father said, "I am a missionary, and I want peace." The Japanese officer went over to the sister's house and stood in front of the door, while the Japanese marched past.
In the meantime, the Japanese had relocated their main base to the island of Beso in Tarawa. A vast complex of fortifications was built on land and on the surrounding reef. The defense of the island was in the hands of an elite and highly motivated force of Japanese naval marines. They were well armed, well dug in, and prepared to defend Besa with their lives. On the 20th of November 1943, the US Navy and the Marines arrived. The Battle for Tarawa was the first ever marine assault in coral reef conditions. The lessons learned here were at the cost of appalling casualties. In all, the recapture of the Gilberts cost the lives of nearly 2,000 US Marines and more than 5,000 Japanese defenders. This, then, is the event we commemorate today. We are honored today with the presence of Mr. Harry Jackson and Mr. Joe Sobel, two veterans of the battle, and Commander Selby of the U.S. Navy.
Very good. Honored to meet you.
I am honored to meet you.
Good.
Commander Selby from the
Certainly.
Very nice.
Pleasure to be here, sir.
Joe Sobel, also a veteran of the
Oh,
Left, right. Left, right, left. Left, right. Left, right, left. Left, right. Left, right, left. Detail. Up.
This event was hosted by the U.S. Peace Corps volunteers based in Kiribati. On the wall behind them, you will notice many small American flags, one for each man who lost his life in Tarawa.
Hands, half, right, step. Ready, aim, forward. Ready, aim, forward. Ready, aim, forward. Freeze it! Out!
The second part of our commemoration takes us to this peaceful spot. "60 years ago, this was Red Beach 2, one of 4 key target areas on day 1 of the landing. Much of the tragedy of Tarawa lay in these waters. On the day of the landing, The neap tide meant that waters covering the reef were at their very lowest. After the first wave, almost all of the landing craft were stranded near the edge of the reef. The majority of the Marines had to wade hundreds of yards ashore in waist-deep water. They had no protection from the relentless fire of the concealed defenders. From above, a Navy pilot described the scene. The water never seemed clear of tiny men, their rifles over their heads, walking slowly beachwards. I wanted to cry. The great majority of Marines killed or wounded at Tarawa never reached the shore.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's all we have time for, but you can look forward to more exciting stories next week. Don't forget to check out our latest news and videos on the Pacific Community YouTube channel and the Pacific Way Facebook page. Until next week, tofa, kakite ano, and goodbye.